Well, welcome everyone. We will go ahead and get started. This is the Dismantling Structural Racism and Advancing Inclusive Excellence Town Hall. I am Cerise Hunt, the Associate Dean for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And before we begin, I would like to just take a moment for a land acknowledgement. So as we gather in this virtual space, we honor and acknowledge that the University of Colorado's 4 campuses are on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, Apache, Comanche, Kiowa, Lakota, Pueblo, Shoshone nations. Further, we acknowledge the 48 contemporary tribal nations historically tied to the lands that comprise what is now called Colorado. Acknowledging that we live in the homeland of Indigenous peoples recognizes the original stewards of these lands and their legacies with this land acknowledgement. We celebrate the many contributions of Native peoples to the fields of medicine, mathematics, government and military service, arts, literature, engineering, and more. We also recognize the sophisticated and intricate knowledge systems Indigenous peoples have developed in relationship to their lands. We recognize and affirm the ties these nations have to their traditional homelands and the many Indigenous people who thrive in this place, alive and strong. We also acknowledge the painful history of ill treatment and forced removal that has had a profoundly negative impact on Native nations. We respect the many diverse Indigenous people still connected to this land. We honor them and thank the Indigenous ancestors of this place. The University of Colorado pledges to provide educational opportunities for Native students, faculty, and staff, and advance our mission to understand the history and contemporary lives of Native people. So with that acknowledgement, we will go ahead and begin our session for today. Like I said, we have a great discussion that's planned today, and it's really, it's been a year since we all convened for the Structural Racism Town Hall. And we wanted to come together and just kind of see, we know we still have a lot of work to go, but what has been accomplished in this process? And so with that, for today's agenda, we've invited various leaders from across the campus because we know that it's not just one person leading this effort. We all have a role in the advancement of equity, diversity, and inclusion at Colorado School of Public Health. And today we're going to hear from the various leaders across the campus who are advancing this work. So we're going to begin, we're going to hear from our very own Dean Samet, this kind of do a recap of kind of how we arrived here today. And then I, as the Associate Dean of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, will do a highlight of Colorado School of Public Health EDI activities, just a quick summary, just to give you an idea of what have we been doing to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion. And then we're going to move to our panel discussions. And I'm really excited because we have some great panelists that are leading some of our EDI efforts on committees and groups. There's a lot of work that's being done at a committee and group level within the Colorado School of Public Health, and we're going to hear from those leaders. Then you're going to have an opportunity, as discussed, to vote for our book. We're going to have a poll. Some of our efforts to educate ourselves have been book clubs. And so since folks are doing books, we thought it would be nice if we all went through a common read. And so we're going to allow the campus community to come together today to kind of vote on what will be our next book. And then we're going to hear from a few of Colorado leadership to discuss EDI efforts and next step. And then most importantly, towards the end, you'll have, as participants, we're going to have an open forum, a Q&A for you all to present your questions and comments as we think about moving forward from here. So with that being said, I think I'm going to hand it over to Dean Samet. Like I said, welcome. We're glad you're here today.
Okay, thank you, Cerise. And I want to add my welcome to that of Cerise for joining this town hall, Dismantling Structural Racism and Advancing Inclusive Excellence. This town hall comes almost exactly a year after a very well-attended town hall with which we discussed the Colorado School of Public Health's document, Our Plan for Dismantling Structural Racism and Advancing Inclusive Excellence. That plan, of course, was motivated by the horrifying events, the murder of George Floyd and others, and the reawakening to structural racism and its tentacles reaching throughout our society. Together, that plan, the school strategic plan, Area 4, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, have provided us a structure for activity over the year from last July to this July. Much has been accomplished as every unit of the school has been engaged in introspection, activities related to equity, diversity, inclusion, and the ultimate target of structural racism. First on the priority list was recruiting an associate dean for equity, diversity, and inclusion. I'm delighted that Dr. Cerise Hunt has taken on that critical role, bringing her enthusiasm, passion, and vision as the inaugural associate dean for equity, diversity, and inclusion. Each of our 3 campuses has new initiatives underway related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. At Anschutz, Dr. Regina Rogers has been active as Associate Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement with a council that reaches across the campus. Other campuses, the UNC, of course, and CSU, are equally engaged on these critical issues. At Anschutz, planning is advancing for the new Center for Health Equity, which will be located at the Aurora Community Health Commons, perhaps providing a nidus for campus-wide activities that will facilitate communications and connections. We asked each of our units to provide a summary of what they have done over the year. The list is extraordinary for the many things that people have done as individuals, the trainings they have sought, the committees that have been established within departments, the reviews of curriculum, new courses, and more. This response is impressive, but needs to be continued and, in a sense, to become only more impressive. We started, as we talked about a year ago, looking internally. At some point, we need to begin to look more closely at our external roles and what we can do as a leader in our state and region in promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, documenting the consequences of structural racism, and helping to guide evidence-based solution and supporting advocacy. I'm proud of what our community has done over the year, recognizing that work on equity, diversity, inclusion, and structural racism will never be done. But we have taken on many of the objectives of our strategic plan well, and I think we are launched very well to continue this work. So I want to thank you all for being here today. This is an important discussion, and I look forward to it and learning from you today. So with that, I will turn things back to you, Cerise.
Okay, thank you, Dean Samet. And so now I'm gonna, unfortunately, due to time constraints, there has been a lot of great work that's been done across campus. And I'm just gonna give a summary of some of the activities. And I'm gonna link it to the structural racism plan. And we, because we wanted to ensure we had participation and could lead up to the panel discussion, we're just going to go through this fairly quickly, and then in hopes that we will be presenting a plan that kind of gives an update of the work that's being done across departments. So actions to advance change. These were the focus areas of the structural racism plan: racial equity assessment, educating ourselves, diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic plan implementation, the appointment of an associate dean for diversity, equity, inclusion, curriculum mapping, partnerships, expand communication, and strengthening our external relations. And so as we begin with the racial equity assessment, the assessment begins by really reviewing our policies, practice, and procedures, and really looking at our work through an equity lens, that racial equity frame. And what has come forward and some of the efforts that have moved forward is hiring process for faculty and staff. So we have our human resources department has really done a full audit and is really changing our practice of how we're conducting searches, committees, and hiring folks. And we're seeing that on on the faculty lens as well. So we're really looking at structures, and we're going to talk about this in a minute. Also, we're going to look at admissions review process. How are we ensuring that our admissions process is done through an equity frame, through an equity lens? And we'll discuss that momentarily as well. There's a staff and faculty salary equity assessments that have been conducted. So as we're building and all of these different assessments and work, we're transitioning the way that we're doing business to really thinking about, well, how are we looking at salary equity? And we're looking across the whole school. Our advisory board composition, they completed a whole composition matrix because that was one of the areas that if we were going to extend our external relations, it would be through like our Colorado School of Public Health Advisory Board. And they've completed their matrix. And then also they've begun recruiting and have diversified the Colorado School of Public Health Board. On our faculty annual performance evaluations have been revised to add EDI activities and accomplishments. And then an area that was also lacking is, well, what was our value statement as a school as it relates to equity, diversity, and inclusion? And so at the beginning of this year, the whole campus community had an opportunity to support the development of our equity, diversity, and inclusion commitment statement, which is posted on the Office of Health Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion webpage. You will see the statement, which includes definitions and our call to action as well. And this, like I said, was a whole campus community was able to provide feedback and really streamline. So we have our values, it's stated, and we're holding ourselves accountable to these actions. Educating ourselves was another big component of the strategic plan. We've already launched the Inclusive Excellence Learning Series. We have the Structural Racism, U.S. Histories of Structural Racism. Dr. Daniel Goldberg led 2 workshops. You can access the recordings for these workshops. And there's, thanks to our colleagues at the Rocky Mountain Public Health Training Center, they've created a web page where not only can you review the recordings of these sessions, but you can also generate and download resources. So I would encourage you, if you haven't done so already, avail yourself to those resources. There has also been faculty training sessions specifically for faculty about creating inclusive class environments and also editing your course for equity. Once again, those recordings and resources, there's been a page specifically for faculty to continue to build your knowledge and information about these sessions. But in addition to that, the departments and centers have had seminars and trainings across the board. So at a department level, these are ways to engage faculty, staff, and students in trainings. So there's trainings in different areas, book and journal clubs. There's so many books and journal clubs. And, you see the book Cast, The Origins of Our Discontent. The executive committee has been reading the book Cast. And that was our first book club, and we're going to continue to move forward in books and have had some thoughtful discussions around Cast, because our whole intent about readings and books is not only just to read, but how does this inform our practice? How does this inform our work? And so that's where we're constantly thinking of, okay, how do I apply what I'm learning? In addition to that, I hear the staff and PRA Council is going to also begin reading Cast in August. And not only are they going to be reading Cast, staff and PRAs have access to get a copy of the book for free as well. Then some teams have gone through an equity learning lab in HSMP. This is all able to build their proficiency. And the Office of Research is planning to collaborate on a seminar to address EDI and research. So there's some things that are coming down the pipe. Now, one of the things with the structural racism plan was to ensure that we were moving forward on the strategic plan. And so, as many strategic plans can sit on the shelf, we want to make sure that we're moving forward. And so one of the first goals is to build and maintain a diverse group of faculty, students, and staff. One of those areas that we've been looking at is scholarships, student recruitment metrics to measure efforts to recruit and retain diverse students. And we're really trying to enhance our data collection systems to capture staff, faculty, and student diversity. So we have that awareness. And then in addition to that, there's several departments have mentorship programs, not only for faculty, staff, and students as well. So we're really looking at, if we're gonna, retain and maintain, really what support services do people have, in mentorship and linking folks to mentors is a key way. And I've seen that within multiple departments and centers. When we go on, another goal of the strategic plan is to provide programs that ensure an inclusive and equitable community dedicated to the development of public health scholarship and to practice that advances health equity. What's been great is several departments and units have dedicated faculty FTE to advance their EDI efforts. So as one of our calls was to ensure that, we had leadership at the dean's level, what we're also knowing is at the department level, there's leadership and dedicated FTE for time for folks to advance this work. And then CSU has not only dedicated faculty, but they have student positions as well that they've created. The curriculum mapping, there's been a lot of curriculum mapping, really mapping for equity, diversity, inclusion, and structural racism, which has led to several course syllabus revisions across departments. And we've also created a Colorado School of Public Health Inclusive Learning Environments Classroom Statement. This is in partnership with the Office of Academic and Student Affairs, the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and Faculty Senate. So we're waiting for Faculty Senate's final approval on this learning environments classroom statement that's really going to hold us to accountable of how we create inclusivity inside the classroom. So it's not just a diversity statement, it's about how are we creating inclusivity in our class environments. And our plan is that this will go on all Colorado School of Public Health syllabi. We're in the process of revising course evaluations. And that's been in place. There's been new competencies to incorporate equity, diversity, and inclusion and promote health equity within all departments. And that's birthed out of this whole curriculum mapping. And then there's some new courses, which is very exciting for our students. This is something that we heard from our students. Social epidemiology course, social determinants of health, systemic determinants of health. At CSU, this is also a CSU course, developing a practice of leadership in public health and anti-oppressive practice and research. And that's a new pub course that's going to be offered this fall. So then as we're continuing to move forward, diversity and inclusion strategic plan implementation, our third goal is foster a diverse and inclusive environment through campus engagement, activities, and training that celebrates diversity to enhance cultural proficiency. I see this really, and based on what I've received from the deans and chairs and from various teams, as department and unit equity, diversity, and activities across campuses. Town halls, creating the space for these discussions, really acknowledging and having these thoughtful discussions. In addition to this, there's been a 2021 climate survey, and the results will be released at the end of this month. But this has been, like I said, another partnership within the Office of Academics and Student Affairs and the Inclusive Excellence Committee to help launch the 2021 climate survey. So we will have the results of that survey at the end of this month, but that's also a strategic plan component to have continual climate surveys to assess our climate. So then an area that we, partnerships and educational pipeline, and this is an area that's going to continue to grow, but one of the things is the Office of, Academics and Student Affairs have really been working to examine. We do have the University of Colorado and Colorado School of Public Health 4+1 dual degree program. What we are doing is really examining and how can we strengthen a pipeline that's already in place, so then we can build upon that pipeline process. So during this time of kind of reviewing our policies, practice, and procedures, we want to also ensure our partnership with the downtown campus and really examine, because that's a great way to ensure that that pipeline doesn't have any leaks as we're moving forward. And then also within the Center of Innovation, Design, and Analysis, CEDA, there's the whole research job for undergraduate students who qualify for federal work study program. So they've started this work study program that's introducing underrepresented students to the sciences, which is a great pipeline as we're thinking of how we can engage in opportunities for learning and growing. So I think that that's something that we definitely want to build upon as we're thinking of the pipeline. As you all know, this is the beginning steps. And as we've stated, we still have room to grow in these areas, but we want to think strategically on how do we build in these different areas. Expand communication with leadership was another component. What we've seen is there's been approved student newsletter topics and language that's coming out of the Office Academics and Student Affairs and School Information. And so CBH and EPI conduct regular town hall meetings. So they're regularly coming together as a community to really expand that communication. And department and center EDI committees are also keeping the lines of communication open. And what's great about these department and center EDI committees is that there's a mix of faculty, staff, and students on these committees. In addition to that, we still have the Inclusive Excellence Committee that's really bringing a diverse group of people together, leadership, staff, students, all together to discuss equity, diversity, and inclusion. So we're really trying to maintain that communication as it relates to, and so we're ensuring that we can engage with leadership. And then strengthening our external influence. And Dean Salmon has already had mentioned this component, but we want to strategically develop partnerships to advance equity and social justice. And so I've already talked about our advisory board is an area, because those are external folks who are a part of our school and help shape and make decisions. So that's an area that's already been discussed. But the Public Health Practice Committee, they're creating a partner list and really trying to gauge where are our partnerships, and characterize existing partnerships to really, the level of engagement with each partner, aims of the community partner organization, aims of partnership, the location, and deliverables and products. So we're really trying to ensure, okay, when we're talking about our external influence, we need to understand and kind of assess, well, where are we? And what decisions are being made, and who are we partnering with, and what's the strength of that partnership as well. So that is where, that is my overview, for, the work that's being done at the school level. And we're gonna have an opportunity to talk about, well, what are our next steps? And as a community, we're gonna have an opportunity. But one thing that I like to say is I just wanna thank everyone for their efforts, because we've, and in my opinion, we've made progress. We're making the steps, we're on this journey, and we're moving on this journey, because I know folks that are on equity journeys that may not be moving. And the one thing that I can say, as a school, we are making movement. And as already been stated, we got to continue the movement, but it takes all of us. And it's great to see that we have champions across all three campuses, that are willing to champion and help promote and advance equity, diversity, and inclusion. And with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Raven Cloxton, and I'm super excited about Raven, who is the Public Health Equity and Practice Coordinator, Raven Cloxton. She joined our team at the beginning of June and has skyrocketed. However, she's no stranger to the Colorado School of Public Health. But I'm going to hand it over to you, Raven, for the next panel discussion.
Okay, thanks so much, Cerise. Yeah, so as Cerise mentioned, my name is Raven, and I have the pleasure of introducing our first panel of representatives from a few of our EDI committees and groups across campus and the school. So with us today, we have Dr. Elizabeth Greenwell representing the Department of Community and Behavioral Health's Anti-Racism and Equity, our committee. We have Megan Hervey representing the Anti-Racism Student Action Group of the Colorado SPH at CSU. We have June Homde-Janakul, MPH, representing the Asian Pacific Islander Affinity Group. And then we have Francesca Macaluso, MPH, representing the Staff and PRA Council. And then we also have Dr. Wei Peng, representing the Department of Epidemiology's Health Equity Council. So to begin, I'll let you all just go ahead and turn your cameras on for a second and join the screen. Perfect, nice to see you all. So I'll just start by asking each of you to tell us about your group, what are your focus areas, and how people can become involved if they're interested. And so we'll go ahead and start with Elizabeth, if you don't mind.
Hi, everyone. I'm the lead for the CBH R Committee, which is the Anti-Racism and Equity Committee. And we have a big department. We have several concentrations: CBH, Maternal and Child Health, LPH, and also Population Mental Health and Wellbeing. So we have a lot of faculty, staff, and students. But the R Committee is comprised of faculty, staff, which we need more staff on the committee. And then we have some amazing and committed master's and doctoral students. We also have a co-lead, Dr. Heather Kennedy, and she just joined us last month. So we meet twice a month. We meet on the first Thursday at 10 and the third Monday at 1 p.m. So if you'd like any more information, I can put that in the chat box, and that way you can connect with me and let me know if you'd like to join. But the R Committee's goals, we really are focusing on 6 key areas, and that is teaching, research, practice, professional development and self-awareness training, policies and procedures, and also hiring, promotions, and the evaluation process. I don't have time to highlight as much as I'd like to, but just to let you know that every month at our faculty meetings, we devote about 30 to 60 minutes on professional development and self-awareness training. We do a lot of breakout sessions. We've gone over white supremacy culture, developing norms and how to implement those in the classroom, using case scenarios to go over microaggressions. And our goal is really to ensure that our faculty are culturally aware and have the capability to communicate about racism and EDI topics, both with students and also in their practice and in their research. The larger project we're working on right now is on syllabus and curriculum revision for anti-racism and equity. And we're working on a kind of a really complex, well, it's not too complex, but just several levels of a rubric that we would like to keep working on and then share with faculty, so that that's a continuous process that will help lay the foundation for some of the work that we hope to do. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Yeah, next we'll go ahead and hear from Megan about the Anti-Racism Student Action Group.
Hi everyone, my name is Megan, and as Raven said, I'm here to talk a little bit about the Anti-Racism Student Action Group at CSU. So that group formed about a year ago in summer 2020, and over the course of the past year, we've been working on developing and implementing various initiatives related to equity within the program. So I'll go ahead and just highlight a couple of those things that we've been working on. One of those projects has been a summer mini course that we've been working to develop, and I'm so excited to say that we'll actually be launching it this summer very soon. We're in its kind of like final stages, so that's awesome. And the course is on Canvas, and it's for incoming students, and it's sort of just designed to introduce topics of health equity and anti-oppressive practices in public health to students who are coming into the program so that they can kind of have that lens throughout their time in the program. And then another project that we've been working on is actually kind of a two-parter. So it deals with the practicum at CSU. We wanted to develop both a training that students would participate in prior to going through their practicum experience. And the goal with that is really just to help try to introduce ideas around anti-oppressive practices in community-based work, because obviously the practicum is all about practice-based learning and going out into communities. So we want students to have that lens as they're doing that work. And then the second part is to do an assignment that is to be completed throughout their practicum time, but also related to kind of how they are incorporating equity in the work that they're doing and what they're learning about. And then the final thing I'll speak to is another project that a subgroup of the action group has been working on, and that is a proposal to develop a new prompt for the application for the Colorado School of Public Health. So this is a proposal that would ask students to engage with a question about kind of what health equity means to them and how they're thinking about that as they're thinking about going into the public health field. Again, just to kind of introduce these concepts early on and set this as really a core value that we want students to have and frame their practices and their studies with. So those are some of the projects that we're working on. And then if anyone is interested, we do have a sign up form, and I can go ahead and share that as well in the chat so that everyone can see, but that's kind of how we're fielding interest in our group.
Well, thanks so much, Megan. Next, we'll go ahead and pass it to June to hear about the Asian Pacific Islander Affinity Group.
Thank you. I'm June Hamne-Jonakul. I started the API Anschutz group due to the rise in anti-Asian hate and discrimination over this past year and a half. And we realized that there was a need for a safe space for the API community to gather. So it started with healing circles and offering those, a couple of those, especially at the height of it, earlier this year, following the hate crimes and shootings in Atlanta. So through those, we realized that there was this missing community support piece for API members at the Anschutz campus. And that led to the creation of this affinity group. And it started as a Colorado School of Public Health specific group, but it's expanded to become campus-wide. And it has really become a great safe space for anyone who identifies as API to gather, and that includes staff, faculty, and students. We've met, I think, 3 or 4 times now, and it's got about 16 members that kind of come and go as they're available. And I think one of the biggest areas that we find as a strength are that, you know, it is a mix of staff, faculty, and students, and it's a place where we can come to discuss the happenings of what's going around at campus or around the world, and then also process and grieve together, especially with the violence that's been going on. So if you're interested in joining, please reach out to me. I'll put my email into the chat. But other than that, yeah, we really recommend anyone who is craving that community and support to join.
Great, thanks, June. Next, I'll just go ahead and pass it to Francesca to tell us about the Staff and PRA Council.
Thanks, Raven. So I'm Francesca Macaluso, and I have the pleasure of serving on Staff Council both as a member and as the co-chair for the Professional Development and Performance Evaluation Committee. In general, I think Staff Council related to EDI issues and other issues in the school serves to be both a place to offer opportunities for all the amazing non-faculty members of our school community, and also to be just a platform where any non-faculty member can come and talk about issues specific to their job role that might not be represented in other areas. So, you know, related to some of the concerns that were brought in our more recent Staff Council meetings, again, as Cerise mentioned, we were able to use Staff Council resources to purchase the book Cast for a bunch of School of Public Health members, and we'll be facilitating a discussion about that book again, specifically for staff and PRAs later in August. And we're also in general kind of looking for opportunities to strike a good balance for non-faculty between acknowledgement and accountability related to EDI efforts, in sort of in tandem with these efforts to better incorporate EDI into faculty evaluations. We want to make sure that all the non-faculty members in school that are spearheading these efforts are kind of formally acknowledged through their performance evaluations for those efforts. My general plug for the group is you don't need to be a member to be involved in any of our initiatives or attend any of our meetings. So come talk to us about what you want to see happen in the school as a staff or PRA. We're always looking for more input.
Perfect. And then we'll go ahead and hear from Wei now with the HEC, the Health Equity Council.
Thanks so much, Raven. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you here. I represent the Epidemiology Department's Health Equity Council, which is a group of 3 faculty, 2 students, and a postdoc. Our focus, beyond the overall focus of promoting health equity, has shifted over the last 2 years. When we first convened in summer 2020, our goal was really to figure out what we could do to promote health equity. We wanted to determine how to integrate racial and health equity content into core coursework, who we can go to provide guidance on best practices in this realm. And then finally, we wanted to identify sensitivities and biases within our department, since this is crucial to informing next steps. And in working through these inquiries, we identified 3 concrete needs of our department. And doing this has resulted in what I think of as some intermediate solutions that are essentially steps to facilitate DEI growth. So the first was we realized we needed to interface with researchers in the health equity space to spur thinking on how to operationalize and interpret findings with respect to social constructs like race, ethnicity. This serendipitously coincided with a health equity focused departmental seminar series organized by one of our faculty, Dr. Angela Lee Wynn, and it directly resulted in a student-led health equity journal club. And we've used what we've learned from these activities to inform course curricula and also questions for course evaluations. The second thing we realized was that in addition to having open dialogue about DEI concepts through our departmental town halls, we really needed an anonymized incident reporting mechanism, which the committee was able to put in place using a CU Denver email box. And we're now currently consulting with the Ombuds office to develop a process for triaging and finding resolutions for these incidents. And then finally, our department chair, Dr. Jill Norris, has for over a year now made health equity a standing topic at our monthly faculty meetings. And in doing this, it became abundantly clear that our faculty needed and wanted hands-on experience recognizing, interrupting, and apologizing for microaggressions and micro insults that might occur in the classroom or in other work settings. This resulted in development of a 2-part anti-bias training workshop, which will be moderated by the DEIJ trainer Flo King at CSU. This workshop is going to be taking place on August 23rd as the first part, and then November 18th for the second part. And it will be open to all Colorado School of Public Health faculty. So this is something that Cerise is working with me on in conjunction with the Rocky Mountain Public Health Training Center. So please keep an eye out for the save the dates and the calendar invites, and I hope that you can attend. Beyond that, other ways in which folks can get involved is by participating in our town halls, promoting underrepresented persons in public health, providing ideas for speakers, educators, and collaborators with expertise in health equity so that we can all learn about the best ways to practice this, not just in our teaching and research, but if we're doing it correctly in our daily lives as well.
Okay, thanks so much. That was great. And next, I'd just like for each of you to share what are your recommendations for moving forward and recommendations for our next steps with the Colorado School of Public Health. So we'll just go around again and start back with Elizabeth.
Sure. I wrote this down, and then I know that Cerise had mentioned it as well, but one thing that I think is really important is that we often talk about the work that we need to do as individuals. And really, what does that mean? And she just mentioned it too, that, you know, we've got a lot of resources and repository lists. Those are available for CBH in our department. It's also Inclusive Excellence has those lists for you know, articles, podcasts, movies, whatever you want to read, books. And I know the central office on campus has a list as well. But, you know, when you pick an article or a book or something to go over, write down some thoughts, have a notebook, you know, where you jot down those nuggets that you can implement on a daily basis, or you can implement on a project that you have coming up. And, you know, I think it's great to educate yourself and learn and grow to dismantle racism and discrimination, biases and prejudice. But it's also, you have to take it one step further into action. And what can you do with your daily work and with your future projects?
Great, thanks so much. Next, we'll hear from Megan.
Yeah, hello. I think one thing that is coming to mind just in this moment is just in hearing from all of these different amazing people doing this amazing work. I think to myself that I think a great next step is just a really strong networking system, because I think sometimes I don't always know exactly what other people are working on, and it's so great to just hear all of these different efforts. So town halls like this are awesome opportunities for that. I think another thing, just in general, hearing from students more and gaining student feedback and implementing that too in our initiatives as we're doing our strategic planning. And then a really specific thing, because we've kind of been working on it, but we haven't been able to quite push it forward yet. I think it would be so awesome if we could see a health equity prompt in the application, which is kind of what I spoke to earlier, but just an opportunity to have students kind of engage on that topic prior to getting into the program, and also just sort of introducing that as a core value from the get-go, I think would be awesome.
Thanks so much, Megan. And you brought up a really good point about being able to network and know what's happening with all the other EDI committees and groups across the school. So I just wanted to go ahead and mention that the Inclusive Excellence Committee is sort of functioning as the hub for all these groups to come together and hear from each other and work on these initiatives collaboratively. And so the Inclusive Excellence Committee meets on the 4th Monday of every month, 2 to 3:30 p.m. So I'll put details in the chat for that as well, for anyone who doesn't currently receive the emails or calendar invites, so we can make sure you get that. And then, yeah, so next we'll just go ahead and hear from June.
Thank you. Something that comes to mind for me is the importance of supporting students, faculty, and staff now. So not only just planning for future cohorts and things like that, but also thinking about how we can be present now. And that could mean creating space, being more intentional about making space to talk about things that happen outside of the school environment, within the school, because these are things that affect our students' lives, and as well as the lives of the faculty and staff. That also means not shying away from these conversations that are hard to have. And I think that is something that could be strengthened now, is that support and that presence, in addition to working on all of these initiatives.
Thanks so much, June. And I'll go ahead and pass it to Francesca.
Yeah, I think just to kind of reiterate some of my feelings from earlier, I think there's so many staff, PRAs, just non-faculty members of the School of Public Health who have really amazing ideas and who have a lot of passion around this area and drive to make change. I think the Inclusive Excellence Committee is a great example of a really important effort that was spearheaded by a lot of non-faculty. So I would love to see more explicit opportunities for engagement from non-faculty and hearing those kind of diverse ideas based on the just crazy variety of job roles we have in school of public health and all the different perspectives that those people can provide.
Okay, and then we'll just go ahead and pass it to Wei now.
There have been so many great ideas that I'm sitting here struggling to think. I guess I'll tie it all together by saying that I've heard a lot of common themes about inclusivity in the area of DEI, and I think that resonates in many ways because being anti-racist means you have to be inclusive in order to fully embrace anti-racism and anti-bias. So I think it's great that we're having town halls like this so we can hear what other groups are doing. And thank you, Raven, for bringing up the Inclusive Excellence Committee, which crosses departments. I also want to echo what Francesca said about incorporating all aspects of our community. So a lot of what I've been doing has just involved really thinking about what to do for faculty. But I will say a really important next step for us is thinking about how can we also involve students in this because they're obviously very important, and how can we include them in these workshops? And we've not quite figured out how to do that yet, but that's on our list of things to do. And in thinking about students, also recognizing that staff are more or less fixtures in our School of Public Health, just the same way that students and faculty are. And it's also important to include them as well. So I guess big plug for inclusivity and just pointing out that there's a lot more work left to be done.
Okay, thanks so much all of you for joining and just representing your groups and sharing with us. This has been really great to hear from you all and to, just kind of glean from your perspectives. I just wanted to remind everyone, if you did have questions as any of the panelists are speaking, you can add those to the Q&A tab, and we'll have that Q&A session at the end. And I'll go ahead and pass it over to Cerise again.
Okay. Well, thank you, Raven. Thank you, panelists. You all are doing some great work. And so we thank you for your efforts as well. So now it's time for our poll. As stated at the beginning of the session, we want you all to help us select our next common read. And so if we could go ahead and launch the poll, and you will have an opportunity to vote for our next book. And has the poll been released? Okay, so it looks like The Sum of Us will be our next book by Heather McGee. So that will be our next book selection. And then, it's kind of close with The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. So we're going to look, the next book that we'll move forward with is The Sum of Us. And we will probably start the book because we want to give the the staff and PRA council enough time to complete cast. So we'll probably begin the book in late fall. So you'll hear some announcements when we begin that next common read, but we're gonna wait till after the staff council completes the cast book, and then we can all begin reading the next book. So thank you all for voting. And we're going to continue on to our next panel discussion. So for our next panel discussion, we're going to hear from some of the leaders, just a few of the leaders at Colorado School of Public Health, to really talk about efforts to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so I'm going to invite Dr. Danny Britton, the Associate Dean for Academic and Student Affairs, Dr. Chrissy Shard, Faculty Senate member, and also faculty within Colorado School of Public Health CSU and administration within CSU, and Christine Gillen, our Associate Dean for Administration and Finance. So if you all wouldn't mind joining me for the session as we begin the discussion. And so as we start our panel discussion, one of our first goals in the strategic plan is to build and maintain a diverse group of staff, students, and faculty. That's one of our goals. I kind of shared some things that are going on, but I would like each of you all just to take a moment in your specific areas. What efforts have you and your team made to build diversity? You kind of, you know, what's going on? So Dr. Britton, do you want to kick us off? If you'll unmute, please.
I was one of those people. Thanks so much, Cerise. I appreciate being here. And I really want to start by saying the Office of Academic and Student Affairs, our team is very dedicated and is using an equity lens to look at every responsibility that we have moving forward. And so we've certainly engaged in a number of things related to looking at the diversity of our students as well as our staff. In particular, one of our strategic goals is to look at diversity of the student body. And what we're currently doing is working with a team of us, including Dr. Hunt, on what is a good assessment tool to determine what units are currently doing right now. We need to understand what we're currently doing so that we can move forward. There are a lot of efforts within different units, whether it's departments, campuses, across the state. We're working with different universities in Colorado, outside of Colorado, but understanding what we're currently doing so that we can move forward. But I want to add here really quickly, and I know I only have 2 minutes, it's important that we don't just understand how to recruit diverse students, but we need to have the supports in place and the resources available so that students are successful and that they stay. And so we're also working closely with central campus offices on these support services and resources, whether it's the Office of Disability Access and Inclusion, Office of Equity, Office of Student Affairs, et cetera. So very, very important. And then I want to put a little chime in here. Thanks to Dr. Mary Dinger and Dr. Lori Crane, our international students now have a STEM designated DRPH. And that's incredibly important for recruiting international students to our School of Public Health so that they can have additional employment opportunities after graduation. And that's an important one. I know it's really specific, but I wanted to put that in there. In terms of staff, I tell you, we've had honest and open conversations with HR. So Christine and Kevin Young on what are our efforts for recruiting. And we're currently in the process of recruiting for another position in our office related to admissions. And what is the feedback that they're open to letting us give feedback? What are the ways in which we can improve these processes for all entities in the school? And that's required us to be respectful and honest and have open discussions. And so this is where we're at right now. So continuing to improve efforts on moving forward in that direction, which I think leads to Christine, if you're interested in chiming in there as well.
Yes, thanks, Danny. So yeah, in our Office of HR, I don't think we could do this without partnership with the other associate deans, center directors, and department chairs. It really is a partnership to be open-minded and really just dig deep, look at our processes and be open to changing them and improving and constant continuous improvement. Danny, did you want me to continue with my?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so I just, from an HR standpoint, in collaboration with the Chancellor's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council at the CU Anschutz campus, our Director of HR, Kevin Young, went to the Oregon State Search Advocacy Program I guess it was this spring, and he worked with other campus leadership to kind of undergo a train the trainer program where we learned all about best practices for searches. So while most of our HR protocols within the School of Public Health are governed at the CU system level, in collaboration with unit leaders, like Danny said, and other strategic leaders within the university, as well as our strategic plan, I would say that the Colorado School of Public Health is really forging forward to initiate our own recruitment practices and make these enhancements starting, as soon as we hear these things, we're in a kind of state of mind that we can make the changes as we go and continuously improve. So we started with benchmarking with the help of Cerise, and we did that benchmarking in each unit. So it's not a school level benchmarking. We even dove into each unit to see where are we starting and where do we want to go. We're working closely with each unit leader. We're updating job description templates to speak to our values and our mission, like Cerise stated. We're including pre-screening questions in all of our job applications so that we can really start to review and come from that lens of who are these applicants and do they really understand what type of culture we want to embody at our school. All of our searches have diversity questions in each level of the search process, from the pre-screening to the first round of interviews to the second round to the final round, et cetera. And we have templates for those questions so that units and search committees can choose questions that feel right for their groups. We also are doing increased training for these search committee chairs, search committee members, and really are undergoing a thorough process to understand the time commitment it takes to provide a thorough and inclusive search, and where can we do better and how can we reward the members of our community who are serving on these committees to hire our future employees. Let's see. We're looking at ways that we offer different interview modalities, making sure we're inclusive, and we're also looking at ways where we recruit from and how we get our job opportunities out there so we can cast a broad net. On the salary and equity side of the house, as was previously discussed, the Colorado School of Public Health, in adherence to the central HR office at Anschutz and CU Denver, underwent a thorough review of staff equity this spring, and we are going to, in collaboration with the Equal Pay Act, undergo a comprehensive review of faculty equity this fall, and those processes will continue on an annual basis. That's about all I have.
Thank you, Christine. Chrissy, what's going on at CSU and Faculty Senate?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Hunt. I know my time is short, but I do want to just briefly name as I get started that my embodied identities and my proximity to power, they not only impact the way I show up and engage in social justice and equity work, but that the impact of doing this work, it lands on and in my body very differently than for folks with minoritized identities. And so I just want to name how important it is for me to show up as best I can with a lot of discernment in these spaces. So I'll touch briefly on Faculty Senate and then some efforts at CSU. So one of the main opportunities that Faculty Senate has to engage faculty is at the annual all faculty meeting, right, where we get as many faculty together as we can. And so last year and this year, really the sole purpose of the faculty meeting has been and is going to be to continue to engage faculty in topics around equity and inclusion, and really spanning faculty's role in terms of research, teaching, public health practice. And then at CSU, there's been a lot of work over this last year, and in large part due to a really important group of students who organized and advocated for change beginning last summer. Out of their advocacy has come the establishment of our social justice, equity, and inclusion team, where I work with two paid student coordinator positions. Raven and Megan, who are both participating in this town hall, serve as the first student coordinators in those two positions. The work over the past semester as a team has really focused on hearing the perspectives of Black, Indigenous, and other students of color through conducting BIPOC focus groups. These were conducted by and for BIPOC students in order to really hear not only their perspectives and experiences as being part of the school, but also to hear about some of the ideas that they have for initiatives that we might bring forward or changes that we might make. And so I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Dr. Shar. You're doing some really great work as well. And so thank you for sharing. All panelists is really great on how we're moving forward in the different directions. So just as a thought, what are your recommendations for moving forward? So as we think about where we are now, what's, in the direction of where we're headed, what are your recommendations for moving forward? I don't know who wants to jump in first.
I'll chime in.
Okay.
So let me this is where I get specific on what we're doing in the Office of Academic and Student Affairs. So as Therese has heard me say a few times, it's incredibly important, and I think I heard June say this as well, the introspection that we need to have and the relational and compassion that we need to have in this work is critical. It's imperative that we collaborate. End of story. We have to be able to not work in silos, and we have to be able to communicate. And so building those relationships for understanding diverse perspectives is absolutely how we're going to successfully dismantle structural racism and advance inclusive excellence in the school. So it all combines together. Now, in terms of us, our actionable steps of moving forward in the OASA, everything that we do is working with other people and other entities. So as Therese had said earlier, we're working on getting the final approval of additional EDI-focused course evaluation questions that will be implemented in fall 21. We've also gotten an approved Title IX syllabi statement that will be put on syllabus in fall 21 so that students are aware of their Title IX offices on each of the partner campuses and where to report or receive consultation on discrimination or sexual misconduct issues. Incredibly important that students and others know where to go if they're experiencing situations. Again, we're collecting and identifying best practices for conducting an evaluation of our curriculum for diversity, equity, and inclusion content. That includes content related to the teaching of lectures, assessments within classes, and then of course, faculty preparation as well. We're also identifying and evaluating evidence-based strategies to improve and center equity in admissions and application review processes. We've currently made some changes, and we're continuing to make important changes. We are thinking diverse groups of students, and we are equitable in these processes that we do as a school. I'm incredibly happy to announce that Lisa Vendetti of CU's Foundation has worked so hard for our school and has worked with a donor so that we can get an upcoming, soon to be released Colorado SPH Reparation Scholarship that is going to be giving one student to complete their MPH $40,000. I can't tell you how happy that makes me, and it's just so important for our school. And of course, that's not it. We're continuing to work on the Diversity Inclusive Excellence Scholarship fundraising, and we were able to fund 6 amazing students with these scholarship funds last year. Continuing forward, I know I'm taking a little longer, but working with Heather Kennedy, Chrissy Chard, Daniel Goldberg on the development and future implementation, as well as our co-SPH students, on a future implementation of a new student virtual module / course for an inclusive and equitable educational environment, excuse me. So very exciting. We're working on that right now. Very proud of this team, what we're doing, what we're thinking. We're working on a pilot program, Dr. Mary Dinger, Colorado SPH Advisory Board members, School of Medicine faculty, on increasing public health presence in rural communities through collaborations of ND and MPH students, where we can try to impact disproportionate rates of health disparities, which is often what we see with minoritized populations in these rural communities. And then we're part of a couple other strategic planning goals, working with Joan O'Connell on affordability of education programs in the school and curricular needs for the workforce that's led by Lisa Miller. Just to name a few things.
Just to name a few. So you're working on things that are looking to retain students along with recruit students. So I think that was one of the questions that came forward is, well, what efforts? So we're looking at finances, creating these spaces where we can engage together. So we're looking at it from both lenses. So thank you, Danny. Thank you. Who wants to go next?
I'll just say it was wonderful to see the community come together, faculty and staff, to support the diversity scholarship that went into effect last year. And just a little plug to continue with that, because it's not an endowed scholarship. So we do need continued support for that scholarship to keep it going. And it did impact 6 students. So it's really a wonderful thing. But from an HR perspective, I think I touched upon this continuous process improvement. We learn something from each hire that we go through. So continuing to receive that feedback to me and Kevin Young is critical. Our collaboration, as Danny kind of touched upon with the other associate deans, the strategic plan implementation committee, faculty senate, inclusive excellence committee, and our PRA and staff council is absolutely critical. And this is just touching upon recruitment, and Cerise has, as you mentioned too, with students, it's about retention too. So we haven't even begun to dive into retention efforts with staff, and so staff can feel the value and faculty can feel the value of what it means to be an employee at the Colorado School of Public Health.
Awesome. Thank you, Christine. Chrissy, what are your thoughts, Dr. Chard, as we move forward?
Yeah, you know, I'll just say, gosh, I so appreciate hearing both from Dr. Britton and Christine on all of the things that are already happening. You know, I think about that in combination with the racial equity assessment, really starting to give us a robust picture of where we are in terms of policies, practices, procedures. You know, the climate survey results adding as sort of another piece to that puzzle. Something that I'll just, you know, agree with so many others who've spoken is asking ourselves this question of how are the ideas and the initiatives that we're putting forward being initiated from students, and particularly students who have minoritized identities, and thinking about how are we ensuring that students have opportunities to share not only, again, their experience, but also their ideas of what we ought to be focusing on moving forward. And I think about something very cool about being in public health is our experience and training with community engagement, right? And so like thinking about how we apply that framework to the school, thinking about students being a really integral part of the community that we engage with and serve. And again, you know, the inclusive excellence being a really important example of this. We have students on the panels today as another example. So just continuing to ask ourselves the question of how can we engage students? You know, as one example, could we consider, or do we have student or alumni representation on the advisory board? You know, the other thing I'll mention is, as a predominantly white institution, you know, and June, you spoke to this also, it's so important for us to continue to name where and how whiteness and white supremacy are operating, right? Because it's just baked into everything we do. So a willingness to continue to name that so that we all continue to build our capacity to identify it and then shift the ways that we're used to doing things. And then lastly, I think about those of us in leadership positions, how are we incorporating a line item in budgets related to diversity, equity, inclusion efforts? More specifically, how are we compensating students for their time and expertise? You know, it was mentioned that we have some student positions at CSU that are paid as one important way to really center student voices in the decision-making process. And they also serve as liaisons between administration and our really active student action group. So thinking about how we can, again, compensate students for their time and their expertise and the wisdom that they bring. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay.
Just to feed off that, I mean, that's an excellent point. We are very much behind compared to other schools. So at ASPPH sections meeting this year with the finance team, we learned from other schools that there's a few schools who can actually tag efforts at procurement and diverse suppliers that we're using. How do you mark DEI efforts so that you can actually track the funding streams of what the school is putting forth? So that's something that our Assistant Director of Finance, Peter Hahn, and I are working with the procurement office to start finding ways to more easily just create flags for these things and really be able to track and show where our funds are going. So thank you for that.
Yes, and ASPPH, that's the Association of Schools and Programs of Public Health. So one of the questions that I saw in the chat was, you know, well, are we connecting with other schools of public health? And yes, we are. as the associate deans are all linked. There's a practice session, there's an equity, diversity, and inclusion section, there's a finance section, academic sections, and in all those sections, equity, diversity, and inclusion is embedded. So on a national level, they're supporting our efforts to dismantle structural racism in that. So we are getting evidence-based. We're partnering with other schools. We're partnering here on campus as well. There's a whole, the associate dean for, the associate vice chancellor for diversity, equity, and inclusion, Dr. Regina Richards, has convened a committee on campus that's really DEI committee that's also streamlining our efforts. And we just completed a strategic plan and really are going to begin implementing that strategic plan as well. So we have our pulse to what's going on internally as a school, as a tri-campus community. Also, what's going on each of our campus can inform. So we have speakers coming from CSU across the board. So we're trying to partner and build the collective resources in addition to what's occurring nationally as well. Sandy, did you have another comment? Yes.
I do. I saw Deanna's comment in the Q&A, and I wanted to say that very exciting on the Anschutz campus. We have a new director for the Office of Disability Access and Inclusion, Lisa Meeks. And she is an amazing advocate, and we're currently, as leadership in the school, working with leadership across the Anschutz campus, and we'll reach out to the other campuses as well in the School of Public Health on dismantling ableism as well, and understanding more about how our curriculum can have standardization in relation to accommodations and what's needed for best practices with even lecture development, et cetera. So we are, Deanna, we are working with the Office of Disability Access and Inclusion on these types of topics. And just remembering and going back to what Chrissy said, students are at the core of what we do. And student success and retention it really is at the core of the Office of Academic and Student Affairs. And so we're looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion of all types of students. And it's important that we are making sure that we are transparent and getting this information out there. So I appreciate this platform today to just be talking about what we're doing.
Well, I want to thank all the panelists, and I'm going to invite all the panelists to please turn on their cameras now. And we want to hear from the audience. I know we can't see everyone in this webinar space, but you do have an opportunity. There are some questions already in the chat. I think we've answered a couple, but Raven is going to read questions, and I want to invite other participants in the session today to please, this is our time as we're thinking, what are your thoughts, reactions, and comments as we're moving forward as a school? Is there anything that you would like to share or discuss or ask specific questions? So we want to open up the Q&A box for these type of questions.
Okay, great. Yeah, so there are questions in there. So I'll just go ahead and start working through some of those. One of the questions asked earlier on was, where can we access the inclusive learning environments statement?
We will ensure that it's posted. We are waiting for the final vote and approval from Faculty Senate. And once it's been approved, we will share it with the campus community. So expect an email in regards to that statement as we're moving forward. So we will share broadly.
Okay, great. Another question in the chat was, many of these impacts seem to be focused on future students and a pipeline. What will be done to support current students?
Yeah, I can tell you, thank you for that question, Libby. Current students, again, working on that virtual module opportunity for students, that's for all students. And some of the efforts, including getting the Title IX statement on syllabi, that's for current students so that students know where they can have discussions, consultations, and make reports related to discrimination and sexual misconduct. We're also working in our office on engagement activities beyond the course and module, but looking at all things that we do in our responsibilities in the office for current students, whether it's our communications, whether it's events that are held, whether it's working to try to have additional student groups, whether affinity groups or not, with the Inclusive Excellence group. We are working on aspects in relation to current students, as well as focusing on how we can change things for the future as well.
Thank you. Okay, another question we had was, it seems like faculty are often overwhelmed, which can limit their ability to consider inclusivity and offer anti-racism support. What is being done to support faculty to not be overburdened so they have better opportunity to provide support to students in classrooms?
I guess that unanswerable question is for me. You know, I'm not sure overburdened is the right word, but I think that everyone knows, and I'll speak only to the faculty role right now. It has a lot of parts, and a lot of them are fairly unrelenting, and some of them build and peak and drop away, like teaching a class or designing a new course. And you know, as someone who's been in academic leadership for a long time, I've always been concerned about the work-life balance issues, and particularly for the more junior faculty as they're getting started, not only professionally, but often, you know, with relationships with children. It's a very demanding time of life. And I think, you know, departments, support groups will provide opportunities to discuss it. I don't know, you know, I think so those kinds of support are there. Peer mentoring, I think, is often very useful. I mean, my last comment about this is that we're coming off an extraordinary year and a half that I think has just, if anything, amplified these pressures by the way that lives have been altered. And I think as we transition back to whatever we're transitioning back to, it's going to be something different. I think these issues of how we work, what the balance is, will remain. So I think finding avenues for support for faculty, and I think helping the mentoring, development of faculty, time management, all those things are critical. And then that said, a lot of this comes from the environment, and there are parts of that that simply won't change, whether that's how hard it may be to get research grants or time clocks of promotion and tenure. So you put your finger on an important and long-standing issue.
Our next question is for Megan, and it's just asking if you can share more about the training and resources available to students regarding anti-bias practices when working in community.
Yeah, so that project that we've been working on specifically related to the practicum is very much still in development, I will say, but the role that the Student Action Group has been playing has just been kind of doing some research into what trainings already exist, because we don't want to have to reinvent the wheel if we don't have to, but we've also found through our research as a group, as we've been working through an online course called The Roots of Health Inequity, that some of it definitely could be adapted to better fit our needs. So right now we're still in the kind of development and research phase of trying to figure out exactly what we want that training to look like, and how we might adapt materials or pull from other trainings that already exist to kind of create our own if that's the route we go. But I do think it's definitely a great idea that, you know, any departments or anyone who could use it, we should collaborate, because that's, I think, where we get a lot of great work done. So yeah, we're open to ideas at this point, but still in development.
Thanks, Megan. The next question is for Christine, and it's, can you speak more to some of the new recruitment efforts?
Yeah, I think, you know, I've been with the school for almost 6 years, and I think when I first started, what we saw was a real push to fill seats as quickly as possible and to get rid of vacancies quickly. And so I think what you'll see with our recruitment efforts is a much more thoughtful, intentional process with more guidelines. I don't think if you're recruiting right now today, these guidelines, how-to guides, templates, videos have not yet been created. And that's why we're fact-finding right now so that we can put forth more comprehensive guides and PDFs and more detailed emails. I mean, if you've been a search authority lately, you notice how many emails come in from HR about all the things you need to do. So we've actually learned a lot from Danny and Cerise and from others who've recently recruited to put together more comprehensive guidelines. But I do think what you'll see here is the expectation to fill a vacant position is not going to be take 2 weeks now or 3 weeks to fill a position. So you'll be seeing we're asking for grace and understanding that sometimes to undergo these efforts, it takes more time and the outcomes will benefit us all. And it really is the direction that we're moving in. So thank you.
Thanks. One of the other questions that came up was how these resources and efforts are going to be accessible to students on all 3 campuses. And so anyone, please feel free to chime in and speak to some of that, the efforts and how they're going to be just available to everyone across campuses.
I can make a comment. So everything that we're trying to do in the OASA is to be accessible and to be inclusive of all students on all 3 campuses. So an example currently is the peer mentoring program that Catherine Brumfield is leading. So making sure that there is the inclusion and there are students who are interested in being a part of this can be a part of it. Also for the virtual course that we're developing, that is involving students, fingers crossed, we're trying to get students from all the campuses in relation to working on that. And so that is our effort. And we are certainly open to any sort of conversation about how we can do better in relation to that. But we really want, being a person who is at the UNC campus for 9.5 years, it's at the front of my mind that we make sure all students are Colorado School of Public Health focused. We're focusing on all of them, so.
Okay, I think that was all the questions that were, wait, sorry, one more just came through. So this one says, if an important goal is shifting the overall culture of inclusion at Colorado SPH, how are you working to engage faculty, students, and staff in DEI efforts who are not independently motivated to change? It's an important question.
I hope I'm not muted. That is a very good question. And I think that, first of all, we're tracking to see who's engaged and who's not engaged. And that's one of the efforts. And we're ensuring that we're trying to make these spaces for training and engagement available to everyone. But to get true engagement is holding accountability to these actions. So we're talking about course evaluations for faculty, and folks, for creating class, inclusive class environments. Those are ways that we're trying to hold folks accountable to these actions. And we're looking at, faculty job performances, faculty evaluations, explain your EDI efforts. That is for staff as well. So these are ways that we are trying to ensure that it's not an opt-out, that this is just, that people can select to be a part, but we're really trying, and that goes into changing our structures. So when we're talking about assessing, we're really assessing. I appreciate how the work that's going on in HR, to really look at our search committees, ensuring that it's inclusivity on our search committee. These are all methods to ensure that, folks have engaged in implicit bias, that their, equity is being discussed, that we're changing the way we're doing business, which will ensure that it's not going to be an option. It's going to be the way we do business. And that's why we're really pushing for our policy, practice, and procedures. And with that, we're engaging in learning so that individuals can have the education. So the inclusive class environments, I appreciate, Way and the Health Equity Committee and EPI inviting us to be a part of that bystander training and microaggression. We're creating these opportunities for folks to have the education and knowledge to make the changes in their courses. But then in addition to that, or in their centers or in their work environment. So it's not just classrooms, we're talking about our workspaces as well. So we're not engaging in these trainings and education. We want, just because, to check a box. We're creating that space that people get the learning, and then the expectation is you apply it. And then in addition to that, we're going to create structures to hold people accountable. And when and the whole campus community, faculty, staff, and students. So students will have an opportunity. There's going to be trainings and education for students as well about having these inclusive environments and what does that mean. And then we are going to have the whole course around anti-oppressive public health practice and research. So we're looking at all of our areas for the learning to occur with the expectation that we're applying. And with that, when we're applying, we're going to create structures to hold the whole campus community accountable to the direction that we're moving.
Thank you. The next question is that it sounds like many of the new courses, for example, social epi or anti-oppressive research, are being offered through the CSU campus. Will these courses be offered online going forward, even after the COVID closures end, so all students can access them?
One of the courses I'm thinking about, the anti-oppressive, I think it's called Foundations of Anti-Oppressive Public Health Practice. It's actually being offered on both, it's actually offered through the Anschutz campus. So that one for sure is available to all students on all campuses, because it's, though it's synchronous, it's remote.
Yes.
Social epi, I think we will sort of reassess interest moving forward, but for sure the anti-oppressive public health practice course is offered on all campuses.
Thank you. And then we have a question regarding how we are doing with promoting adoption of EDI practices among the external employers who are hiring our grads.
I think that that's a great next step. I think that we are looking at, there's the whole partnership committee that's looking at our partnerships and who we're engaging with in those different areas. But I think that as we're working more internally, I think that that's going to be an excellent transition to where we're saying that, are we aligning ourselves with organizations that, uphold these equity, diversity, and inclusion values that we embrace. So I think that, to be honest, I asked my colleagues to share as well, but I think that that's an excellent next step in our work as we're moving forward, to ensure that as we are partnering and we're engaging and we're promoting these opportunities, that we're aligning ourselves with organizations that have these values.
I also think we can allow it to go the other way, where employers are saying to us, here are the skill sets, or here are the, the things that we would love for students to have developed, that then just further our justification for and our efforts to advance these things, because we know that employers are also looking for those skills. We've had some of our community organizations up here in Fort Collins let us know, right, that it's really helpful when students come having this lens really developed. So I think it can actually go both ways.
Right. Absolutely.
Raven and all, before we end, I just do want to say thanks to everyone for participating in an incredible discussion, and thanks to Cerise and you as newest member of the team for all the work that you've done in getting this together. This was valuable, and of course we'll be doing this again.
Yes, I would agree. And I would like to thank the panelists as well, everyone that's participated. I want to thank the community the whole community that's helping us move this forward. And yes, this is one of many discussions. We want to create these spaces to further this conversation, further this discussion. And I just want to encourage you, if you're not involved with the Inclusive Excellence Committee, this will be a space where all groups come together, leadership from, the dean's office is also involved in the Inclusive Excellence Committee, but that's the way to learn, and it's open to faculty, staff, and students. So thank you all for being here today. Continue the good work. Make sure you're in these efforts, you're taking time to rest and replenish in this process, because it's hard when we're trying to make these changes. So really practicing self-care as you're moving forward as well. So everyone have a great afternoon. Thank you, panelists. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you all.